This is a fairly short talk, and the goal here is to just kind of talk a bit through the kind of like mechanics of um, transactions in the Filecoin economy, and especially thinking about how transactions in the Filecoin economy can accrue value back to the network. Um, and we've looked at a lot of these diagrams over time. Just remember, Filecoin has a range of businesses. Each of those businesses generate a range of transactions. People can use a currency in that range of transactions. Um, Zooming in a little bit into kind of like the Falcon economy diagram, you can think about like these four different areas. Think about and this this kind of model applies to any economy in the world, and especially right now with all of the talk of tariffs and so on, you are seeing like a real world play by play of like what happens when you kind of like try and apply certain policies to these kinds of economic models, and you try and take certain moves, and you think they're going to go one way, and in reality, like actually you didn't think it through enough, and it ended up goes a different way. Meaning, try adding a range of tariffs and to with the hope of like forcing a lot of uh, economic activity to be added into your particular environment. But hey, it turns out the economies outside of your environment may be quite powerful, and then that actually doesn't happen, and then you have to like on one-year tariffs. So anyway, the broad point is like this the kind of thinking here runs the global economies in a bunch of ways, and you have to think about like these kind of highly interlinked environments where you have regions of transactions that tend to be connected through certain kinds of like conduits. Kind of like going back to this diagram here in the bottom right, you can kind of see like the Falcon economy connected to a range of other economies, and you can think of like the conduits between those economies. So at any point in time, any kind of transaction happens in a particular economy, or it happens as an exchange from one economy into another. Here, these economies tend to be bound together by a medium of exchange in that economy, and so on. Certainly, some economies exist where like you can use multiple means of exchange at the same time, and like that just kind of tax on multiple economies at once. But to be kind of very concrete here and useful, um, it makes sense to kind of boil down the range of transactions that the Falcon economy tends to operate in like these four broad categories. First and foremost, there's kind of like the range of internal business, meaning these are transactions denominated in Filecoin happening inside of that economy. This corresponds to the way that you would look at any economy today in terms of like the range of transactions that happen in that economy. So this would be like if you think about like a country, think of like all of the goods and services bought and sold within that country using that country's currency. Or if you think about, some of the kind of like international currency, so things like reserve currencies like the dollar, think of like all of the transactions that happen in USD, which include not just all the transactions in the United States, but it also include a range of international commerce happening denominated in the dollar. Then you have, things like consumption type of transactions, which is you're explicitly removing some amount of currency from the money supply. And so in kind of national currencies, it tends to be things like taxes, which kind of like remove some amount of currency from circulation. In blockchains, we have various different mechanisms that introduce burns of different kinds, which kind of accrue value to the network. So think of like gas burn and slashing fees and all of that kind of thing. Um, and kind of like protocol fees. In the last few years, we've seen a range of networks adding protocol fees. And then you have transactions that kind of interlink that economy to other economies, and these are usually exports or imports, meaning that economy is selling some product created endogenously in the network in the economy to some other economy, and that export tends to take some resources out of the network in exchange for some currency being bought. And here it depends on kind of like what currency you end up with. And ideally, what you want to end up with is you want to have that sale of that good or service to be done in the currency native to the economy. So here would be like a good export would be selling the service for Filecoin, and that would bring the corresponding value that was kind of like sold into the to be addressed by Phil the Phil token. If that sale happens in another currency, like in dollars or some other currency, then that value stays in that other economy. That value never comes into this economy. I'll have another diagram later that kind of like goes into it. And you have like the same kind of case in imports when you're kind of like bringing some value from another economy back into the network. Now you can ideally like turn kind of like imports into a success if you are able to like pay for those imports directly in Filecoin and kind of like bring those imports into to become kind of like internal businesses. This would be the equivalent of like um, building data centers and building and manufacturing hardware and selling it in fill and just having like bringing kind of like all of the process of building the data centers and manufacturing the hardware to become kind of like internal businesses within the Filecoin economy. But in practice, kind of like you can think of those exports and imports as moments of currency exchange where there are some other parties in some other economy either buying goods and services from the Filecoin network and therefore thereby causing a purchase of Phil, or they are selling goods and services to the Filecoin network in terms of data centers, hardware, and so on, and causing a Phil sell to happen. Here's this other diagram that kind of I mentioned. So you can think of this as kind of like one of the core loops of the Filecoin economy, where you have a set of storage providers selling storage in Filecoin today, and if you denominate that transaction in Fill, then you get a range of things happening. So first off, clients are able to pay for that deal payment in Filecoin either by the clients buy the Fill themselves some other way, and thereby bring whatever currency they have into the Filecoin economy that accrues value to Filecoin in that moment whenever that client buys Phil in order to pay for that deal. And when the client pays for that deal to the SP, that value stays in the Filecoin economy until that SP chooses to then potentially pay for some resource in terms of capex or opex. But for that time being, in for the lifetime of that deal payment, that happens in Filecoin, and that value stays within the Filecoin economy. So kind of some good features about this is that if this is denominated in Phil, then that keeps the transaction costs in the Filecoin economy, increases the GDP of the Filecoin network, and accrues value to Filecoin. Now, the bad parts of this is that this is because of the volatility of crypto, this tends to be difficult for long-term payments. And so that means that clients often cannot do it. Like they just literally cannot enter into long-term agreements lasting many months or years denominated in a currency that is going to fluctuate very significantly relative to their own local currency. This isn't just common to crypto. This happens in normal, like everyday international commerce. Like there are companies in say Europe that transact with the US or companies with the US or transact with companies in Asia, and they need to agree on a medium of exchange that is mutually okay to both sides. And in some cases, if the deals are long term enough, sometimes they include provisions for what happens if the fluctuation of the currencies is significant enough. And so this is like a very real problem in lots of economies. Now, what's happening today across the network is that in order to like kind of like deal with this problem for simplicity, a lot of SPs just have to like charge for that storage in fiat of some kind, say dollars or something else. And so that means that that deal payment stays outside of the economy, it like never comes into the economy. And so you have like this double whammy problem where you have a value being created in the Filecoin network, which is kind of like the storage, and is being sold outside of the network for a currency outside of the network. So that value never comes into the network. And then block rewards are kind of like leaching out of the network towards to the SP, and then the SP is kind of like paying capex and opex. Now, today we now have a protocol fee that kind of like brings some amount, thanks to FIP 100, we're gonna add this additional arrow flowing from the SP to the Filecoin network that pays a fraction of those blocker rewards in value back to the network, but that's still less than the block rewards that are being gotten anyway. So like that's still like a net loss, right? So like the whole thing here still doesn't work. Now, the good things about this is that, hey, it's not volatile. It enables stable long-term payments, but this keeps all of the transactions outside of the Filecoin economy, and it does not increase the GDP of the network, and it does not accrue value to Filecoin. So about a few FDSs ago, I think like FDS 3, we talked about this at length, and we kind of figured out, a set of us came together, and we figured out that what would be a way around this problem to be able to keep the transactions in the network but enable these deal payments to be denominated in kind of like long-term stable currencies that are amenable to the long-term clients is to denominate these in a stable coin backed by Phil. So that means if you kind of create a stable coin and you issue it backed by Filecoin, which there's a range of protocols that can enable this kind of thing. Um, that have been developed in the crypto space over the last few years. Like there's the whole host of different DeFi oriented stablecoins that do this. So if you use one of those and you create a stablecoin backed by Phil, then you can cause the deal payments to be effectively denominated in that stablecoin, and that can give you like a long-term stable price. But in a sense, sorry, there's an error here. It's not exactly denominated in Phil. This would be like denominated in, say like USDFC, which would, sorry, which would keep the value in this kind of like uh, fiat-oriented, long-term stable currency, but it keeps the transaction and all the transaction costs inside of the Filecoin economy. This again increases the Filecoin GDP, accrues value to Filecoin, but it's not volatile and it's good for like these stable long-term payments. Now the bad piece of this is that hey, there's like a new currency to use, and so ideally here because you can issue a stablecoin alongside an existing fiat currency, then this shouldn't be too difficult to like deal with. But it does introduce some friction because you have to deal with like a different token. It's like a slightly different component and whatnot. But the bad part here is like very low, and like this is something that we should be able to kind of do and handle. And so this, in order to achieve this, the folks at Secured Finance have been working super hard on this for the last, year or over a year almost, and have built the USDFC protocol, which is the first major dollar denominated Filecoin stablecoin to be used for this purpose. And folks can now like use USD, like USDC is live today. You can use it for payments and so on. And so like now is a moment where we need to transition all of the kind of transactions that the Filecoin network tends to do as much as possible into transactions denominated by this kind of protocol, so that the value can stay and be accrued within the network. One word of warning here, DeFi is complex. DeFi is risky. DeFi introduces all kinds of like potential vectors for attack and whatnot. And so we want to be careful with how we on ramp into this new protocol. Meaning we want to like test it at scale. We want to kind of like gradually ramp up the use. And so we don't want to kind of like go from like 0 to a million, right away. Like we want to kind of like ramp up the use gradually, and do all of like there's already been a range of audits done in the protocol and a whole set of like security testing and whatnot. But DeFi, lots of different DeFi protocols have gone into all kinds of issues, and so we want to kind of like ramp this up confidently and stably. But this is one of the things that I think is like most exciting in terms of being able to now finally accrue value back to Filecoin, because it kind of like closes this huge problem and enables all of these transactions to be now denominated in Filecoin, which helps bring a range of those exports now properly into the Filecoin network, and now can also give us a way of tracking the amount of transactions happening, right? So like the fact that like we can do this in if we can see those transactions being happening in USDFC, it also gives us some amount of visibility into the range of transactions happening, and so we can generate like useful data streams in terms of actually reasoning about the economy of sales happening. One of the things that I think would be amazing to see here is to move into a world where maybe Phil Plus only goes towards transactions that or like storage that is using some kind of like Phil-backed currency. So either Phil itself or some Phil-backed currency in the deal structure. I don't know. That seems like a fairly hard thing to do, but like we can figure out maybe how to do it. It'd also be really great to see a range of other things that currently would be imports moving into USDFC, meaning like if you can have to pay for OpEx or CapEx in a bunch of ways, And normally you would be using USD or use USDC or USDT or whatever. Maybe you can use USD FC for that. And at that point, you can now keep all of those transactions into the Filecoin economy. I think here in this model of like, issuing a depend networks, um, like you issuing a stable coin backed by a depend's uh, internal currency, I think is one of those cases where Filecoin just kind of like ran into a problem way ahead of a lot of other folks. And I guess kind of like the Ethereum community ran into this, and the Ethereum community issued us a set of like ETH-backed stablecoins earlier. But I think we're probably the first major DePIN network to do this. And I sort of predict that as DePIN networks work and scale, a range of them are going to want to do this. I sort of like anticipate that we'll see more of this happening. One other component here they'll mention is like a lot of, if you're curious about like the kind of economy theory kind of behind this, the things that you can look at are like the quantity theory of money, and things that, like the equation of exchange and so on, which is kind of like a way of like relating um, quantities like the supply of money in an economy and like the velocity of money to like the broad price level and the aggregate output. And so here, in something like this, a way of kind of like um, changing these values, like if the quantity of money um, uh, like the relative value of these components, um, you can imagine how changes to these quantities would affect like the overall currency, right? Like so if you have like the same level of aggregate output and the same level of velocity of money, but then like the quantity of money goes down, then the price level might go down as well. Sorry, the price level would then go up correspondingly. And so you have like all of these kind of relationships between these quantities. And so one of the things here is that by bringing a bunch of transactions into the economy, you effectively make them part of the aggregate output. Um, and by enabling parties to hold more of the value in the currency itself, Phil, or in these kind of like Phil-backed stablecoins, you then decrease the velocity of money. So both of these are actions that broadly kind of improve the outlook for the Filecoin economy. Cool. I think that's it. So thanks so much.